If you have given your life, your all, to God through Jesus, then you will likely ask questions such as, what now? Or what can I do to get closer to God? You may also wonder about activities we call ordinances such as baptism or communion. These are all good questions that we must answer as we guide the believer to become a follower. Hi, I'm Ron Braley of Finding Discipleship, and I welcome you to the first of 5 short lessons on what I believe are critical Christian foundations for everyone who wants to follow God. They must know and pursue these things. Being a follower of Christ implies movement from self-centeredness to seeking God and actionable love toward Him and our fellow humans. Action-oriented love is true worship and obedience that are parts of a covenant, a two-way agreement with God. We must learn about this covenant to answer the question, why? And to gain a sense of urgency about following Him. We will learn the covenant and our necessary response through the lenses of faith, love, and hope. This lesson, along with observable and godly modeling by mature followers, will help train the potential follower to pursue God and His covenant by having confidence in what He has done, is doing, and will do. In other words, faith and hope. We will also learn that this newfound faith and hope must compel us to produce the fruit of godly behavior, living properly and dealing with temptations so we can avoid practicing sin, engaging in fellowship and prayer, and developing faith through Bible study. Therefore, the objectives of this 5-part lesson are to explain the covenant, define faith, love, and hope, explore salvation, and cover the ordinances of baptism and communion. So let's start with an overview of our covenant with God. From well before the time of Abraham, God has sought a close relationship with humans, and He desires to return all of His creation to the perfection it once enjoyed in the very beginning. The relationship He seeks is one of a covenant and a mutual arrangement by which God will save devotees from coming judgment and be the God of those who accept His gracious offer. We accept His love and respond in kind by devoting to Him our lives and resources, all that we have and all that we are. All right, so let's talk about the reason for a covenant with God, our separation from Him and perfection. So why is a covenant with God necessary? How did we get to our current state of imperfection and wickedness and death if everything started out in a perfect state? Humans disobeyed God's single commandment. Because He is fair and just, and therefore must keep His word, humans would from that point on experience death and hardship through separation from God and the tree of life. But He has a plan to reclaim creation and return all to perfection. More on that later. So this would be a good time to pause the video as you read the following Bible references, which I'll post here and also at the very end of the lesson. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, man was made in the image of God and given dominion over all the earth. Genesis chapter 2, verses 15 to 24, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in other words, all knowledge, and a reminder that God made woman too. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, verses 11 to 13, 16 to 19, and 22 to 24. Adam and Eve rebel. They are exiled from Eden. They've lost access to the tree of life and will now suffer physical death. And then move to Romans chapter 3, verse 23, which reminds us that all have sinned and fallen short of God's glory. Then Mark chapter 7, verses 21 to 23, evil comes from within and influences us. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, those without God are dead and headed for wrath. Romans chapter 1, verse 18, which talks about wrath for the ungodly. Romans chapter 14, verse 10, all will stand judgment, everyone, for what they've done both good and bad in the body. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, all our deeds, again, good or bad, will be judged. Now, let's discuss God's desire, His overarching will to reconcile creation. Although humans separated from Him by choice through the first man, Adam, the Creator wants us back. Remember the plan I mentioned? Unless a perfect being willingly died in our place, God would have to allow humans to continue a path of death and destruction because of our bad choices, not God's. Thankfully, the one we call Jesus, Jesus in Greek, Joshua or Yahshua in Hebrew, agreed to be that sacrifice to pay for our rebellion against God the Father, who then raised him from the dead as a sign for all who will believe and follow him. We must choose to believe and give our entire life to God in return if we wish to be part of the restoration of creation to perfection. But what do we do in the meantime while we wait? While we wait for that new perfect world to come? Well, this would be a good time to, again, pause the video as you also read these Bible references, which I'll then post here and at the very end of the lesson. First, John 3:16, which reminds us that God's Son was given as a sacrifice. Romans chapter 5, verses 10 to 11, that talks about rescuing by Jesus who reconciles us to God. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 18 to 20, God desires the reconciliation of all creation. Colossians chapter 1, verses 21 to 23, we'll be reconciled if, and I'm going to emphasize the if here, we stand firm in faith and hope. And finally, Revelation chapter 21, verses 1, 5, and 7, dealing with the faithful who will inherit the new heaven and earth to come. All right, so let's talk about the perseverance we must do while we await the judgment and our new creation. First, let's define the word. Perseverance is a constancy or a continuation. Just like practicing or continuing in sin will bring a reward of spiritual death and hell, no matter whether we call ourselves Christian, practicing, persevering in good works and purity will bring the reward of new creation and reunion with God. In this case, we must stay in this covenant with God by keeping our word to give all we have and are to Him, to devote ourselves, and obey His commandment to actionally love Him and humans, despite hardships we encounter or temptations we must struggle with. I can tell you, as you probably already know, this isn't going to always be easy. Regardless, we learn of God's ways and we live by them. Our obedience proves our love for Him and others and is why we'll be rescued from punishment after judgment and helped by God's Spirit in the meantime. And as we've already read, this salvation, this rescuing by definition, begins with joining God in a mutual covenant. And for the third time, this would be a good time to pause as you read the following Bible references, again, which I'll post here and at the very end of the video. First of all, Romans chapter 2, verse 7, which discusses eternal life for those who persevere, in other words, they continue, in doing good. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16, perseverance ensures salvation. And then we have James chapter 1, verse 12, persevering brings approval and everlasting life. Revelation chapter 14, verse 12, persevere and keep God's commandments out of faith in Jesus. And then finally, Matthew chapter 24, verse 13, those who endure to the end will be rescued. All right, so that's enough for this session. Stay tuned for Christian Foundations Module 2, where we'll go into detail about the covenant with God. You won't want to miss this life-saving revelation. In the meantime, make sure you catch and save the references at the end of this video. Also, because we mentioned salvation and rescuing and a new creation to come, I encourage you to read my book, Finding the End of the World, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble websites. You can also visit my site at www.ronbraley.com to download free snippets and learn more about me and my work. Please also visit us at www.fightingdiscipleship.org to learn more about our mission to equip believers unknown by God to become followers He knows and saves. May God richly bless you. Oh, and remember, you don't want to be caught with your spiritual pants down, so put on your discipleship shorts. Thank you and God bless.